welcome back to the garage. Today we are gonna rebuild a 2000 CR250 engine. Already got the engine out of the bike and ready to go. We're gonna use a wrench rabbit rebuild kit. Comes with new crank, piston, all the bearings, all the seals. So this one is going to be WR101-014. So we're gonna just get into it here. We're gonna start on the stator side and then move over to the clutch side. All right, so we're gonna start on the stator side here. I've already loosened up this bolt, so it should come off pretty easy. So we'll just pull that out. There's a washer under there. Make sure you don't lose that washer. This was loose from taking the sprocket off already, so we'll put that off to the side. So real useful flywheel puller tool. I will put the link below for the Amazon part from Amazon. Super cheap and easy. Basically, you're just going to screw it in. It is a left-hand thread, so it's going to screw into the left. And again, I think I already loosened this up, so but we're basically just going to use our impact and go ahead and pull it off. So that came off pretty easy. Screw that out. So there goes the washer right now. I like to have this magnet, makes it really easy. It's just a magnet attached to a wire, makes it easy for getting things out like that. So we'll put all this off to the side. Always like to keep everything in order, as you can see, then you don't misplace stuff. Just put that off to the side. Next, we're going to pull out the stator here, two 10mm bolts. And again, if you watch my videos, I like to just loosely thread bolts back into where they come from. Makes it easier when you're going to put stuff back in, then you don't forget where the bolts came from. I know it takes an extra minute or two when you're doing the work, but makes it a lot easier when you're done. So then we're going to go around and we're going to pull out all the 8mm bolts. We got one here, here, and all around. So we're just going to start pulling this out. And I don't keep these ones in order because when I get back, when I'm done, I will just fit them all in each hole. That one's obviously too short. So at the end, you can tell which ones sit down where they should. So that'll be the one for there, but we'll get back to that when we get to that part. So it looks like we've got all the bolts out on that side. So let's flip the engine over. So we'll start with the Kickstarter here. 12mm. That one came off pretty easy, so that's good. We'll set that off to the side. The kit comes with a new water pump rebuild, so we're going to pull that apart and get all the gaskets off of here. So just 3 bolts here. So if it doesn't come off evenly, it's not going to come off very easy. So just do it evenly. So got our gasket. I'll scrape this off. Basically what I like to do when I scrape gaskets is they make gasket scrapers, but I'm just usually just try to do it carefully with a razor blade. What I like to do is I'm going to pull the water pump off right now, and the impeller here, and I can do that really easily when it's on the engine here because you're getting the resistance of the crank. So I'm going to hold the crank and we'll just pull that off. Some of these are left-handed threads, not on this bike, but on some bikes they are. So if it's not coming off when you're turning it lefty-loosey, just make sure that you try to go the other way. Sometimes it's written right here, left-hand thread or right-hand thread. This one is not. Also, don't forget your copper washer behind the impeller. Don't lose that because it will not work properly. So we got that off. Now let's Like, I usually will skip pulling the actual clutch cover off because you don't need to pull this off to pull the outer case. So we're gonna just leave that on here. So we're to keep the Kickstarter in there. So there's all that, and this gasket comes off pretty easy. Some of them do not come off very easy, but that one's good for now. And what I'm going to do is just take this out. We'll throw everything in the washer here in a little bit and clean it all off, but let's just try to keep the work area clean, wipe off as much as we can. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the bolts that came out of this side of the engine and put them in here. Let's pull the clutch off. We're going to have 6 10mm bolts. You want to actually leave the discs in to get the nut off. So we're just going to pull the outer pressure plate off and wipe it off again, and we'll pull the push rod with the thrust bearing, so don't lose any of this stuff. You got a washer, the thrust bearing, and the adapter here, so we'll set that in there. Now we have this nut here that holds the clutch assembly on, so we're going to use the impact to pull that off. But first we are going to flatten out the lock tabs on the lock washer here. I like to just use a flathead and a hammer. Pound those out flat. We got one over here that was done also. So it's a 27mm. Take that, throw our impact on it. You can actually just hold these. Be careful, they do spin pretty quick, so just hold it and use your impact. Should come off pretty easy. So nut and lock washer, and then you actually have another washer underneath there. So again, keep everything in order, and then you can just pull out the whole assembly just like that. Careful, you have also a needle bearing back here and a collar, so I'll take those, put everything together, and then I will set that down in order that it came off. All right, so what I wanted to show you is look at the relation of where the spring tab on the Kickstarter lines up with the case. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep track of that so that when you put it back together, it's roughly in the same spot. So now that we see where that's at, we're going to start pulling the rest of this apart. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just pull the spring out and release it, and then pull the Kickstarter assembly out. Some of these have dots, alignment dots on the back, but most do not. So we're gonna try to get it set up about where it should be, and then we'll just put that off to the side here. Then your Kickstarter starter gear, collar in the back, so we're gonna set that down also. The next thing we'll do is we will pull out the assembly here for the generator or power valve. So I'm going to pull this part out and wipe everything off again. Collar, there's a collar on here, so just be careful of that. And then the generator assembly should just pop right out. Just note this kind of fits right into that notch right there. Just go ahead again, wipe everything off. Notice there is a washer on the bottom here. And a washer on the top too. So don't lose any of those washers. The next thing we're going to do is pull the Kickstarter, or sorry, the shift shaft out. Again, this guy's oil was very dirty, so we're going to just wipe everything down here and get it as clean as possible. And notice again, washer in the bottom, so we're going to set that on there so we don't forget to put that back in. Okay, and then we have our assembly for the shift drum. So 10 millimeter here, 10 millimeter here, and a 10 millimeter here. Don't lose this little collar that goes on there. We're gonna leave it all together. I'm gonna just wipe some of this down while it's in here. And we'll pull this out. And I try to keep this in one piece. It makes it a lot easier when you're putting it back together, because you have your tabs here that are spring loaded. So if you keep it together, sometimes it makes it a lot easier to put it back in. And this has Loctite on it, so when we put it back in, we will also add Loctite to it. So it is going to be a little harder to get out. You can use a regular wrench or an impact. So we'll pull that out. Wipe everything off. Put our 2 screws back in here. So if you notice, this case is actually pretty clean from gasket, but we'll just scrape off. There's only a couple pieces here. There's a piece down here. All right, so the last thing we need to do is pull the gear off the end of the crank. This is gonna be a 14 millimeter. You have to be careful with this. You don't want your crank shaft just flipping around and crack your cases. So I'll hold the crank connecting rod here, and I'm gonna hit this. You don't need too much power to do that. As you can see, I didn't have very much air in there. So that, and then the gear, and again, set everything down. And it looks like there's a collar in here. I'm not going to be able to get that out, so what we'll do is we'll pull it out after we remove the crank. So everything's clean on this side. There's nothing else left to be pulled out. So we're going to go ahead and split the cases. We can start on this side or the other side. It doesn't really matter which side you start on. But we're going to start on this side. So let me grab the Tusk crank tool. We're going to use this tool, which you see in all the engine videos, at least most of them. This is the splitter tool. So what we're going to do is we're going to find some good holes, nice and spread out on here, to thread this into. All right, so basically what we're going to do here is we're going to take our 17 millimeter, and I'm going to actually just use a hand wrench. That way you can feel it. I would never use an impact to split cases. And we're just going to slowly tighten this down. Now, if you start to feel any resistance, you probably want to stop and look and make sure that you don't have any remaining bolts holding the case together on either side. But what I can already see is that we are starting to split. It might be hard to see in the video, but we are starting to split right here and all the way to right here. I don't see any splitting in the front of the engine, so you can see it's not splitting there. So I'm going to keep the rubber mallet handy here, and we'll probably end up doing just a couple taps to see if we get it to split. Now, if it's not splitting, we're going to have to go back and look and see if we missed any bolts. So I'm going to give it a couple more little cranks here and see if it'll start to separate right there. And like I said, I'm feeling some resistance here, so we really want to look and make sure that we have everything out. So again, it's not splitting here, it's all split right there. So we're going to just go back and just double check and make sure we've got all of our bolts out. And it does appear that way. Oh, and our clutch push rod just came out, so let's wipe that off. Put that in there. So I'm not seeing anything holding it together right here on either side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of level the cases out. I'm gonna loosen this up a little bit to relieve some of the pressure. And then I'm gonna get the cases even. So by tapping down on this side, we're gonna get the cases even. And like I said, I still don't see a gap right here. So we're gonna have to figure out what's holding it, binding it. It could just be a dowel pin that's stuck. I believe I have all the bolts out of there. So we're back here. Still have to get the cases fully split up here. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna put back on our puller tool here really quick. And it seems like the front of our engine is split and now the back of our engine is not split. So we'll go back here and there we go. So that just released. So now the crank is all the way pushed through, which was holding us together. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the tool out. So we're gonna need that for the other side. So I'm gonna just leave it, but this will let us bring our case halves apart. And you can see all this gunk in here, which is like, I've never seen this before, but probably coolant that's just been sitting for years. So we're gonna get all that cleaned out. So that's our case half for that side. So we're gonna end up replacing this bearing, this little spacer is going to come out. We're going to set that off to the side underneath the gear that it goes in. So let's just put this off to the side for now. But in the meantime, let's see that we already got a bearing that came off. We have a washer on here. So this is actually supposed to stay inside of this case. So we're just going to set it there so we don't forget to replace it. But as far as the transmission goes, what I like to do is, what we'll do is we're just going to pull out the shift shaft alignment rods right here, and we're going to set those right there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the drum out. So just wiggle the drum out, shift shafts in the correct orientation. We're going to hold our rod and we're going to pull the shift fork out as it comes out. And so then we have this one right there. That's going to be our top one. We have the front of the engine one here, so that's gonna go right here. And we're gonna set these down the way that they came out. So we've got that, and this one's a little bit harder to get out because it's down, stuck into the cases. We're gonna try to get it out. And then again, we're gonna put it onto the shaft here. So those are all set to the side with the shift drum. Now we're gonna remove the transmission. So what I like to do is I'll tilt the engine forward and I'm just gonna push through on the counter shaft here and wiggle this. Now if you notice, or just remember, we do have a washer here, so let's keep that in place. And we're just gonna wiggle the transmission out and hopefully get it out in one piece. Now it didn't come out in one piece, so we're gonna just make sure we put everything on right back in the order that it came off on. So there's that. And then we also have another washer on this side. And if you forget where things go, you can always look at a parts diagram and it'll show you exactly where. This is a washer from the front shaft. All right, so we're gonna set all that down together. Some people like to zip tie it. I'm gonna have this all together today, so I don't need to zip tie it. It's not going anywhere, so I'll just set that down all in order. As you can see, we got a mess of oil in here, so this will all get cleaned up when I get the crank out. I'm not going to bore you guys on the camera cleaning it, but I will clean all of this out and make sure that it's nice and clean when we put it back together. So as you can see, our crank is still stuck in here on this bearing. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the locking pin for the magneto for the flywheel. This one, sometimes they're hard to get out, sometimes they're easier, but what I'll do is just kind of take a flathead, stick it on there, and then tap it out, and that'll pop out. Put this somewhere safe. I usually like to put it into the flywheel here. It's magnetized, so it'll stay in there. That way you don't lose it or forget to put it back in. We're gonna go back to our case splitter here and use this as a push to slide our crank out. And we just release. And as I was right, it looks like the crank bearing is actually stuck onto the crank. So that's okay, because we're not going to be separating that. We're going to be replacing both parts. So I'm not too concerned with that, but that was the issue. So what we ended up doing was just pulling it all off in one piece. Lesson of the day, use a little bit of heat if you can't get something unstuck. All right, so we're back here. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to end up switching out all the bearings. I'm going to get everything cleaned up, but we're going to end up switching all the bearings here. Basically what I use is a blind bearing puller tool. We're also going to remove this counter shaft. Notice that there's a washer under there, so we're going to hang on to that. So what I use is for seals is this tool. I'll also put the link in Amazon for below. Comes in handy, but I will also mark the seals, make sure that they go back in there the right direction. So this makes it a lot easier if you don't know. I mean, I know which way these seals go in here because I've done this before, but if you don't know, just mark them and then you know exactly which direction they go. Same thing with the bearings too. I'll mark the bearings off. Then that way, if they're directional, you get them back in there the right way. So bring the other case over. We'll do the same thing with the other case. Things separate, right? So this will be the left case, right case. So all the left bearings I'm going to put on one side, and all the right bearings I'm going to put on another side, and seals. So that way you make sure you get everything replaced that you should. So that's one seal, comes out nice and easy with this tool. There's another seal, and your crank seal. So that, and you have to be careful when you're taking these screws out because they strip really easy. So I believe this is the number 3 Phillips head bit to take these screws out. So there's one screw, and we're going to use Loctite on these. We're going to use Loctite on these when we put them back in. Do that. So then what I do is just take this and I'm just going to pop it out. Comes out. Some of them come out easier than others. And again, we're going to set that with this side of the case. And we're going to need to use the blind bearing puller for these two. So I'm going to grab that and I'll be back in just a second when I get that set up. So basically, we've got everything laid out. I'm going to clean the cases up. I'm going to clean all the gasket surfaces off of everything, and then I'll be back and I'll show you guys how to install the bearings, install your seals, and then we'll throw it back together. All right, so we're back. Cases are all cleaned up. There's a little bit of oil here, but cases are all cleaned up, and gasket sealing surfaces are all scraped, so they're all nice and clean. This is just a little bit of dirt and stuff that I can't get off. So those are all good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just start dropping bearings in here. If you remember, we set the left stuff on this side and the right on this side, so those cases are backwards. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on this part. Remember, we have the oil sealing surface here. Now I kind of wiped away my mark here, but I know that this is going to be facing the oil. So let's find that bearing in the kit. And if I put all these in the freezer, so they're actually going to slide in there pretty easy. So after they go in the freezer, they shrink, should fit in the case nicely. Some people like to heat up the case, freeze this, and then they usually just drop right in. This one actually just went in, didn't even need any hitting or anything. So that bearing's good. So we're going to take this and we're going to put it in the box with the old parts. All right, so we're going to put the locking tabs back in here. We just got a little bit of Loctite here, a little bit of Loctite on this one, and find our number 3 Phillips. And I'm just going to snug them up really quick, and then I'm going to go back and tighten them in. Perfect, so those are in there. All right, so next we're just going to replace the last 3 seals here. So we're going to just go in and find them. There's a match right there. We're going to use the one that looks more similar to the OEM one, which is going to be this one. We've got the countershaft seal there, and your shift seal is right here. So we're just going to go ahead. Most of these you can actually just push in by hand. So just use a little bit of push in there and get them flush with the case. Same thing with this one. Now see, this one went in a little bit too far, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my tire spoon and just carefully pull it up just a little bit. And that seems just about good. All right, so we can get rid of these. And again, with this, we're gonna get it just flush with the case. Just take it slow. All right, so now that that seals in, what I like to do is I'm going to take some oil and I like to just fill the cap up. And you have this around that you can use it for lubricating everything. And I'll just take some oil and put it on the inside of all the seals. All right, so now our cases are all set up here. All right, so I've got my wood blocks. I use this instead of an engine stand. It works just as good. But the first thing we got to do is we got to actually put the crank through. Again, this was also in the freezer. It's not going to quite just slide right in there. So we are going to have to use a puller tool. Again, Tusk crank pulling tool works fantastic. So it's set in there about as far as we can get it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn it over here on the side, and I'm going to hook up our crank puller tool. So basically you have a few pieces of this. The first one that's going to go on is the silver collar. The next piece that's going to go on is the adapter. The adapter is going to go the round side towards the engine, and just thread this on there a decent amount. Then you're going to put this part on. And the next thing you're going to do is you are going to get, this part has a little tab that lines up into here. So once you get that aligned, it will slide down like that. And we're gonna just use these metal bars that they give you in the package, just like that. So now if you see, I can't get the nut on here. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to go ahead and I'm gonna have to just loosen up this part. And then I'm also just gonna have to thread this on not quite all the way. So let's go ahead and get this relined up and get our rod in there. And you can see I'm still a little bit short right here. So we're gonna have to try this again here. I wanna make sure you don't rip those threads off when you're pulling it. So we'll just do that. Let's go ahead and put this on here. Put our metal rods in there. It's almost enough. If we pull it through, there we go. So I'm gonna actually go back and I'm gonna just tighten this in just a little bit more because I don't want to rip those threads. So let's line this up. Line our teeth up here. So make sure we pull it all the way out. Go back into the box and get the nut. All right, so now that we got this set up, we can use our adjustable wrench here. And we're just gonna do this nice and slow and easy. So the other thing you wanna do is make sure that your crank rod is not gonna hit the cases here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start tightening this in there slowly. Perfect. So crank spins nice and freely. So now we're gonna get it set up on our wood blocks here. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our transmission back in first. So get everything set up. This is where your sprocket hooks up to, so we know that's gonna go right here. And then this part. So what we're gonna do now is make sure everything meets flush. Washer here, washer here, washer here, and I don't believe there's a washer on this side. So I like to just take it, kind of hold it together, and just get the holes lined up down at the bottom. Notice we lost the washer here, so I'm going to go ahead and put that back on. Now the key when you're doing a transmission is to make sure these are flush. They are going to be pretty much perfectly flush, and that means the case is going to fit in there perfectly tight. I believe this one might be off just the thickness of this washer right here, and then that will make them sit level when they're in the case. So that's it. You're not going to get it to spin, but you do have some free movement here. It will eventually lock because there's the gear selector is not in there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our shift forks in. Now if you remember, we put them in the same order we took them out, so we know this one is going to go on the bottom. So I'm going to reach in here. I'm actually going to lift the gear up from underneath to get it to slide in. So it's kind of hard from the angle I have the camera at, but I'm going to put the shift fork in, tilt it forward, and just kind of work it into there. It should go in there, but it doesn't seem to be. So sometimes what you might need to do is you might need to just push up a little bit from the back here, where your sprocket would go, and then lift it and drop it in. So that's in there now, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to set the top one in there. We're going to wait to put the the rod in there. So now that we have both of the shift forks for the counter shaft in there, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the shift fork in for the front shaft. Then we're going to take our shift drum We're gonna push these off to the side and slide our shift drum in there. Now we're able to line up the tabs that are on the shift forks here and align them into the shift drum. So the bottom one is gonna go in the bottom slot. The one in the front is gonna go in the middle slot. And the one on top is gonna go on the top shaft. So those are all in there. And now what we can do is get a little bit more oil. We'll just put some oil on these shafts, drop it in. I wanna make sure it goes all the way down. And again, a little bit more oil. We'll put some on the front, the rear shaft. Wiggle them around. So now we've got both of those in there. And now we can actually spin it freely because our shifter the dogs are actually not aligned to make it so that it locks up. So that's that. All right, so now that we've got that together, we're gonna make sure this hose does come out. However, on this case, it did not come out, so we're just gonna leave it. We don't wanna mess with it. One thing that we do need to change, if you can see, is this gasket right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pull that gasket out and get rid of it. Again, this all comes in the kit for the wrench rabbit, so they're very helpful. Everything's all together. So we have that set of gaskets, and we also have our center case gasket right here. So center case gasket is going to just slip right on here like that. And we'll line our dowels here to hold the gasket into place while we're putting it all back together. I am going to open up this bag here, and we are going to pull out the gasket that we just took off right here. All right, so now that we have all of that aligned, what I like to do is just look around and make sure there's nothing else missing out of the center of the cases, because you don't want to have to take your cases back apart again. So everything looks pretty good to me. The cases look generally pretty clean to put back together. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to just set this in here. And like I said, it's not going to slide all the way down because your crank's going to hold it back. But it is in there pretty straight here. If you wanted to, you could basically take a rubber mallet and just kind of set it on there. You won't be able to get it all the way in there without the crank puller tool. So we're going to go ahead and hook that up. This one's going to be a little different. This is actually going to use a bolt in here instead of the nut on the other side. So this one's going to go in here. We're going to first put this part on. And we're going to screw our bolt in there pretty decently far. Again, another handy tusk tool. So I'm going to grab the feeler gauges. We're just going to start on the biggest one, which is, it's hard to read on this, 0.35 of an inch. And we're just going to feed it into there. We got plenty of room there, and it won't go on this side. So we know that our crank actually needs to be pulled towards the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spin the engine around. Actually, before I do that, here's what we're going to do. Before I do that, let's go in here, let's flip our engine up, and let's put our bolts back. So what I'm going to do, and you guys have probably seen me do this before, is just check for fitment. You know, like you just see where the bolt fits. They usually stick out about a ½ an inch. So that one's going to go there. That one's going So now our case is together. Now what you can also do is you could also tear this off. Sometimes a razor blade will help too, to make this nice and even. And they put this in there so that your gasket doesn't bend when you're putting it on. So that'll come off. Now you also want to make sure your crank spins pretty freely. This is a good time to check that. So, all right, so now that we got that, let's go back to our feeler gauges here. Again, I think we're just rubbing on that, but I can't fit it here. So we're gonna pull the crank a little bit towards the left side of the motor. So we're gonna go back on this side. Slides in there, slides in there. So we're pretty much centered, so we're gonna go with that. So I'm gonna disconnect the crank puller tool. And put it in the box because we are done with it. Again, Tusk makes great tools, great products. Basically everything you need for a shop. You can check the links below for links to that, or you can visit the website, and I will probably have them listed in the store eventually. All right, so done with that. Put that away. All right, so our engine's pretty much back together here. So we just need to put the rest of the parts back in here, which we're gonna do right now. And we're just gonna go in reverse order of how we took it apart. So first thing that we're gonna do is we are going to put the gear on the counter, on the crank. So, sorry about that. It's a little bit more centered here. Okay, so this is just gonna slide into here. You wanna be careful that you don't push down the lip of the seal. That's why we put oil on here, to make it a little bit easier. So what I do is I'll just push it and rotate. This one's not gonna rotate very well, but basically you're just gonna slide it in there. And that fit pretty dang good. So that'll be good. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put this in there. Let's get a little the crank connecting rod here, and we're going to use our air inlet to tighten that up. All right, so now we're going to put together our shift assembly here. So I'm going to just put a little bit of Loctite on this bolt right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just use a screwdriver here to hold the mechanism, spring-loaded mechanism in place. And if you notice, you have a little notch here, a little dowel there, so we just need to get those aligned. Seems to be good. And we're going to start this by hand. All right, so we're just gonna snug that up. Okay, and so we've got all that together now. So if you remember, we left this together. Now I'm gonna just disassemble it just for you guys, but you can see you have a tab here with a spring behind it, also another one here, and then these are spring loaded. So this is what locks the gears. So you want to make sure you get that all together right. Basically, we're going to just squeeze it in, slide it into here, and then what I like to do is, it's hard, you got to use your fingernails, but kind of squeeze them in right there. And then as you're putting it in, it will just go right into the middle of the selector, just like that. And do that. And we're also just going to put just a dab of Loctite on each one of these so they don't back out. Okay, and if you remember, this little collar goes there. And then we're going to take our shift shaft. Don't forget your washer right here. It's already on there. And we're going to lightly seat this through. Just nice and easy. Remember, you have a seal on the other side. And then just slide it in there. So that's going to be your shift assembly right there. So once like what I like to do is make sure that you're actually shifting. So you can do that now. You want to make sure that the bike goes through the gears. So that would be first, and then I believe that's second. I think I skipped over neutral. Nope, so that's neutral. I'm just holding the counter shaft underneath where the sprocket is and spinning this, and if it spins, if it doesn't spin, that's neutral. And we're going to shift up to second gear. So that's second. And we're going to shift up to third gear. That would be third. And we're going to shift up to fourth. And then sometimes fits, you have to actually spin the engine to get it to click into there, and that's it. So we know we're shifting, so that's a really good sign. We're going to just bring it all the way back down to neutral. If you notice, it shifted late there. You just need to, when the engine's spinning, it pops into gear, but when it's not spinning, it doesn't stay there. So then it clicked into gear. So that's first, and we're going to just pop it up one little bit here. And that's neutral. So now we're in neutral, so we're going to just leave it in neutral for now. So that's all back together. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to put our idler gear on, and then we're going to put our Kickstarter gear assembly on. Now, if you remember, we had it aligned like this, but this in the back needs to lock in down here. So we're going to just try to change the alignment just a little bit, and I'm going to just kind of use my eye to see where it needs to be, and hopefully we get it on the first try. But you might have to go back and change it one gear just to get it to align right. But I believe that it's actually going to be about right here. So we're going to take that. There's a spring underneath here. Make sure you get your spring back in there. And we're going to actually just turn it, slide it in, and then spin it forward. And so you can see I'm actually off by a toot, so I'm just going to pull it back out. And we're going to switch it up a gear here. It's a couple teeth off here. So go back and we'll try this right here. And that's it right there. So that's where it was. So then we're going to go back, we're going to put our spring into the hole here. Our spring looks just a little bit off. Just want to make sure that it's not folded over, because otherwise your case over here isn't going to seat down onto there. So let's make sure we get this in there as best as we can. So that'll sit like that. All right, so we're finishing up here. One thing you want to do is not forget to put your shifter arm in there. So we're going to go through and put this on the other side so we don't lose that. And then we're going to put our push rod in and make sure we get it all aligned right. And before we put the clutch on, we're actually going to put our generator in here, or our power valve assembly. So if you remember, this came out first, so that's going to go in last, and this needs to line up right here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put this in. So note your alignment when you're taking these things apart. You should note your alignment of where this is, because it can actually fit in there. Well, it won't fit there, so the next gear over is going to be right there. So that's where that's going to sit, because if you put it in here, it won't line up with the gears. So that's not a possibility. So we're going to go 1 tooth over, and what I'm talking about is right in here where it meshes with the generator. So that's going to sit like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put our clutch in. Make sure the shaft's all the way down. So we're going to go ahead and slide our clutch on. See our bearing pop out of the back, so I want to put that back in and make it a little easier to slide it into here. And you just got to get your teeth aligned for the shaft with the inner hub. Looks like that's it. And then you also need to make sure that your gears for your Kickstarter mesh in there, and mine just need to get lined up here. And there, went on all the way. So this is going to sit flush with the splines on that. So then we have our washer. We've got our lock washer that goes on top. You can see these teeth match up to the inner basket. And then we're going to do the locking tabs. I like to just use a channel lock. It makes it really easy to just grab one of the tabs. We're going to actually grab 2 tabs here and just pull it up, make it tight, put on here and get one of these bottom ones here. If I can get a grip on it. So now we got that locked so it doesn't come back out. Next, we have our push rod adapter here that will actually push your pressure plate out. Throw our pressure plate on, clean a little bit of this oil off. Perfect. And then we have all of our springs and bolts. All right, so now that we've got that done, I'm gonna push this off to the side really quick. And we're gonna just rebuild the water pump real quick. So it's gonna be a water pump rebuild for a 2000 CR250. So we have our impeller pump gear. So that just pops out. We have a bearing here, a gasket here, which we're gonna clean off. And then what I like to do is just take a little bit of oil and put it on the shaft here. Notice you have a washer on this side, so we're gonna make sure not to lose that. I'm actually just gonna put this back in the case where it came from to make it easier. Then you're gonna take your shaft and just go ahead and slide it through. And that's it. The next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna put your copper washer off. I took all of this off before I took the case off. That way the shaft is locked in place so that when I go to tighten the impeller down, it doesn't spin. But for right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna spin it on there by hand, and then I'm gonna torque it down when I'm done. So there's that. Get rid of the old seals. Now obviously you can do this with the engine on the bike, but I have this engine out of the bike for a rebuild, so we're gonna just do it off the bike like that. So the next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna get your gasket This one, the dowel pins are actually in the outer case, so we're just gonna go ahead and pull it out. Looks like this one. It's gonna be the front one, so that'll slide into there. And if you can see, this one's stuck. So what I'm gonna do is just grab a pair of pliers here, and I'm gonna very easily just try to twist it. If it doesn't come out, I'm not gonna fuss with it too much, because I don't want to damage it. And this one's not gonna come out, so I'm just gonna leave it, and we'll just set the gasket in here. And what I'll have to do is just make sure that the gasket is aligned with the dowel pin right here when I put the case on. So next, remember, we put our washer back in here. Also have a washer right here on top of the generator. And we're just gonna slowly work our cover back on. And sometimes when you're doing this, you have to get the water pump gear to line up. So sometimes you just have to twist on the water pump to get that to align. Let's make sure our spring's in there. Gasket's lined up. So now that's all aligned. I'll just give it a couple little taps. Sometimes the spring for the Kickstarter will get caught and not allow the case to drop all the way down. So I'm hoping we're not having that issue, but it doesn't look like it there. It just slid right on. Perfect. So now everything's on there. So we're gonna go back and get all of this together here. I believe let's tighten down our water pump impeller here. So we just hold the engine, and that's tight. Then we're gonna put our cover back on here. Now these two gaskets should be the exact same, so it shouldn't matter which one you use. Again, our dowels are gonna be pull out. One of them will pull out, so we'll leave the other one in there. So we'll put that on, and then we're gonna put a cover here, and then we have another gasket. And make sure it seats down pretty good, and we'll find our slots for our long bolt. Longest one's there, medium there, and we don't have one there. Or we'll find it. Oh, the right size bit. All right, let's finish this thing up. We're back on this side. The wrench rabbit kit came with a new collar for the counter shaft. We put the seal in here. So we're gonna slide that in, and we're gonna just go ahead and put our counter shaft spacer on there. So that's in there. Good. Just take a paper towel and wipe it off and just double check. If you suck the inside of the seal in, you're gonna end up leaking oil from right here. So we don't want to do that. And it looks like it's seated all the way around and not being pulled in. All right, so then I'm gonna just throw this on. The kit came with also a new spring washer here. He had a fastway ring on here to keep the counter shafts to the sprocket spaced a little bit better for like an O or an X ring chain. So we're just gonna put that like that. Sorry, had a little interruption there. Let's go ahead and put this stator in there. So let's just go in like that. And I'm just going to be lining up the marks from the way it was previously in here, so I'm not adjusting the spark advancement. And again, make sure you get your Woodruff key in there. And we're actually just lined up. If you see there's a little line here, it should line up with the case right here. There's a little indent in the case right here, so it lines up perfectly, so everything was squared away the way that it should. And then we're going to drop the flywheel in there, make sure the Woodruff key lines up, and we're going to go ahead and tighten this down. This is going to be a 17. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down. Basically, that's it for this rebuild. We're going to have to put the engine back in, and we'll do the top end. I'm not sure if I'll make a video on how to put the top end back in on this bike. But if we do, it'll be another video in the list of videos that I've done. So basically that's it. Just throw the Kickstarter back on too. I usually wait to throw the Kickstarter back on until it's in the bike to make sure that we have the gear right on it, so that it sits in the right spot. But other than that, it's pretty basic. You know, I mean, I guess basic for me, but yeah, so that's it. 2000 CR250. Check out the links below for the tools and stuff that I used. Wrench rabbit kit, parts, all that kind of stuff. Visit the website and click subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.